one state, Alabama, this has not happened. One man has stood in the gap, and that man is Chief Justice Roy Moore. And the Supreme Court of Alabama has ruled overwhelmingly, 7-1, that same-sex marriage licenses will not be issued in the state of Alabama. So the award today is a special award in honoring Roy Moore. And I know that he would agree with these words, that he would have no power except the power of that which God gives him. And there's no authority on earth except the authorities that God put on earth. And that it's God that controls the heart of the kings and those in authority. And they do what God would have them to do. So ultimately we're here to give thanks to God and to honor him. And thankful for the work that he's doing in and through our Chief Justice here in the state of Alabama. I have a pastor from Fresh Anointing, House of Prayer, Lance Lee, from here in Montgomery, who will come and speak to us on issues related to the award today.
Well, what I'd like to do is to provide some background or some context behind what we're doing here today. Most of us are very aware or familiar with Dr. King's famous I Have a Dream speech given in Washington, D.C. before the Lincoln Memorial. Clearly one of the most important speeches ever given in the history of the United States, and one of the high moments, you could say, of his life. What most people don't know is he also had what he would possibly say would be looked at as a low moment months before that same year. It was during that time, while he was in Birmingham, that Dr. King had led some demonstrations, some nonviolent demonstrations, and he was arrested and put in jail. And it was at this low moment, if you will, while he was there, that he received a copy of a newspaper that contained an open letter from 8 fellow ministers. And these ministers were writing not to encourage him or to give him any basic words of agreement, but basically to say that he needed to change his methods, and he needed to, in essence, obey the law. So Dr. King had to answer this. And he took a moment, he chose his words carefully, and he wrote down what ended up with St. Augustine, that an unjust law is no law at all. Now, what is the difference between the two? How does one determine whether a law is just or unjust? A just law is a man-made code that squares with the moral law or the law of God. An unjust law is a code that is one out of harmony with the moral law. To put it in the terms of St. Thomas Aquinas, an unjust law is a human law that is not rooted in eternal law and natural law. Dr. King went on to recognize examples from history, important examples. We find he mentioned one from the Bible, where you see the 3 Hebrew boys who stood against the king, Nebuchadnezzar, who had demanded that they bow down before an idol that he had created. He also referenced the thousands, untold thousands of Christians who gave their lives resisting the decrees of the Caesar, thrown to lions, and were persecuted. He mentioned also, of course, the Boston Tea Party, which was one of the foundations sparked, if you will, for the Revolutionary War. And citing these examples, he also made a very important point. He said, one who, and I want to quote from you here, he said, one who breaks an unjust law must do so openly, lovingly, and with a willingness to accept the penalty. I submit that an individual who breaks a law that conscience tells him is unjust, and who willingly accepts the penalty of imprisonment in order to arouse the conscience of community over its injustice, is in reality expressing the highest respect for law. And that's why he found himself sitting in a Birmingham jail. His motives had been questioned, his actions had been challenged, and his body had been imprisoned. Yet he stood there that day, clean in his spirit and his conscience before his God. It's interesting to note that we're not here today to commend a man who violated an unjust law. Actually, it's the opposite. We're here to acknowledge the equally important courage it takes to stand up for laws that have been put forth in terms of justice that are squared with the moral law of God. And we should openly speak about these things. We should acknowledge and commend them. And that, in essence, is the premise for why we're here today.
And now Reverend Owens, President of the Coalition of African American Pastors, will come and speak and present an award. Reverend Owens.
Presenting this award, Coalition of African American Pastors wants to honor a man who is standing out as Dr. King did and suffering the consequences. There was great suffering on the part of Dr. King. He's honored today. We glorify him today, but he suffered greatly. He suffered from all segments of society. But he was able to do what he did because he had faith in his God. And here we are today on a path where I believe Chief Justice Roy Moore will be a leader in this country. I promise you that his leadership is needed, his faith, his courage is needed. So we just wanted to take the time to come to Alabama to present him this first Coalition of African American Pastors Martin Luther King letter from Birmingham jail, because this letter is 16 pages long. And he wrote it on scratch paper while he was there in prison. And we want to give him that award because although he has not violated any laws, he has stood up for the law, but he's getting persecuted if he were violating law. So Chief Justice, would you come forward? We want to honor you today for your stand. We know the suffering that goes along with standing up for what is right. We know that there are many who disagree with you when we don't go along with popular opinion, but we're not in a popularity contest. We're in a contest to do what is right before God and before man. And as a result, we want to present you with this medallion. And if you look at the program, it will tell you the meaning of the medallion. It's courage, it's fighting to the end and being the best that you can be. So we honor you today, and we thank you, Judge Moore. We thank you with all of our heart. And I represent the voice of millions of people across this country that really appreciate the stand that you're taking and defending our right to have marriage, because the way that things are going, we need our Christian rights protected, and they're trying to take those Christian rights. The civil rights movement didn't take anything from anybody. So we want our Christian rights protected, and thank you for doing that.
Country should be standing up for. You know, I was looking this morning about what I might say, and I ran across this paper that was lying on my desk, and it's the case of Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896. In 1896, the people of Louisiana had a law that restricted black people sitting with white people in train cars. And a portion of their comment about the wrongness of those Louisiana statutes referred back to Dred Scott, where they said that black people were property. And today, their words in Plessy versus Ferguson seem to ring very true to the issues before this country today about same-sex marriage and taking away the institution of marriage is between one man and one woman. You know, that institution is recognized in nearly every state. In Alabama, over 81% of the people voted the definition of marriage is between a man and a woman. In Texas, 76% of the people voted for marriage as recognition between one man and one woman. And this is Plessy versus Ferguson's statement. There is a dangerous tendency in these latter days to enlarge the function of the courts by means of judicial interference with the will of the people as expressed by the legislature. In my opinion, the judgment this day rendered he was talking about the judgment in Plessy versus Ferguson, which said they could not sit on the train cars. In my opinion, the judgment this day rendered will in time prove to be quite as pernicious as the decision made by this tribunal in the Dred Scott case. I believe those words could be applied today to any court that recognizes marriage as other than one man and one woman in this country. This is a very important issue. Soon it will be taken up by the United States Supreme Court. And I ask that the people recognize that this is a very foundational principle of our country. I thank Dr. Owens for this award. I think it's very appropriate at this time to recognize the meaning of the institution of marriage and what it really means to our country. Because if we destroy that, we destroy what the United States Supreme Court says was the very foundation of family, and family being the very foundation of our country. Thank you, and may God bless you. Bless the United States.
If the press has some questions, feel free to ask.
I would like to recognize my wife, who I failed to recognize, who's standing back here. Kevin is president of the Foundation for Moral Law, which has done a lot of work in trying to preserve the institution of marriage. And of course, I appreciate her. Thank you. Yes.
Chief Justice Dominic Martin from Sky News in the UK. Last night we met a couple who live in Mobile, Alabama, and they have a son who's 13. They're both women. They want to have the same right that you have to marry the person they love and to be recognised in their love and to get the same rights as you have with your wife from the state of Alabama. Why do you persist in discriminating against them? Why do they not have the same rights in your mind?
Marriage is not based on love. Marriage is based upon the law. It says it's between one man. Well, in Massachusetts just recently, we had 3 women getting married. Did they allow 3 women to get married in the UK?
No. If the Supreme Court of
Well,
the United
why
States...
don't they allow 3 women to be married in the UK if it's based upon love?
We do allow same-sex marriage in the UK.
But do you allow 3 women to get married?
That's not what I'm asking.
Well, I'm asking, not you.
We don't know.
You don't. But if it's about love, why can't they get married?
But if the US Supreme Court does authorise marriage and give the right to same-sex couples to get married, will you allow that in Alabama?
Their precedent would be precedent in Alabama. It would control the difference between the opinions of the Federal Court of Appeals in Alabama and the Supreme Court of Alabama, which has declared that our Constitution is constitutional with regard to the sanctity of marriage amendment. Their precedent would control.
So you would then allow it in Alabama?
It's not up to me to allow or disallow. Their precedent would control. Would it be right? Is maybe the question you're asking.
No, I'm asking what your position would be.
Not in my opinion.
And why is that? Martin Luther King stood for equality, tolerance, lack of discrimination, if anything. Do you not think he must be spinning in his grave and an award is given in his name that seems to be...
I think he'd be spinning in his grave if he found out they were trying to destroy the institution of marriage. I think he would recognize that the civil rights of the person, the color of the person's skin is a lot different than choosing who you want to get married to. Yes, sir.
So what do you think about being compared to Dr. King in receiving this
I
award?
think Dr. King was a great man. He stood at a time when the civil rights of people were taken away by the color of their skin. And that directly contradicts the Constitution. In fact, in this Plessy versus Ferguson case, it talked about this Dred Scott opinion. It said it was a judge that in that case that the descendants of Africans who were imported into this country and sold as slaves were not included and not intended to be included under the word citizen in the Constitution. That was a violation of our Constitution. And certainly, it's a violation of our Constitution. It was something that would be right to stand up for. So I appreciate Dr. King for doing that. I think he would appreciate the fact that we have Dr. Owens here today, who also walked with Dr. King, standing up and saying that this is another civil right, the right to
Between a man and a woman, and rogue judges, politicians, and money bought them off. So it's we the people. What if President John Doe run for president, and you give it to Mr. Brown. The people voted for John Doe. And then you give it to Mr. Brown by some crooked methods. Then that would not be a democratic society. What does your vote mean? So the people's votes were taken and thrown away for what some individuals wanted. 3 or 4% of the population. Now, what about the Christian rights? They tell us what we can do and what we can't do. It's ruining our children. So it's not just about them getting equal rights. They are taking our rights.
Amen.
I think a very important distinction that Dr. Owens is making here. It's been brought up by the press over and over how the United States of America and various states have adopted same-sex marriage. Well, I'm here to say today that they have not adopted same-sex marriage. Only 3 states have voted by popular referendum to adopt same-sex marriage, that being Maine, Washington, and Maryland. The other states, over 30, have been forced by courts. Some 23 of those states forced by federal courts to distance themselves from their laws and their constitutions regarding marriages between one man and one woman. The problem with that is federal courts have no authority in that area under the Constitution. They have no authority because the United States Supreme Court in 2013 in U.S. versus Windsor recognized that from the outset of the Constitution, no federal government authority exists over marriage and family. That exists today in our law. That U.S. versus Windsor has not been overturned. The majority opinion in that case recognized that federal courts, the federal authorities, have no authority over marriage in the states. Then you must ask, well, how have these states adopted same-sex marriage? They've not adopted. They've been forced by illegal federal court orders.
Dr. Owens, this lesbian couple interviewed yesterday, they don't want to take away the rights of heterosexual people to get married. They just want the right to marry the person they love. Why do you believe that authorising same-sex marriage takes away rights from people like yourself?
It takes away the very definition ordained of God by a different definition. It destroys the definition of marriage. It's not about the right to marry. There is a right to marry in our Constitution and in the Constitution of the majority of the states. But it's between a man and a woman.
But a man can still marry a woman if a woman can marry a woman, or a man can marry a
A man can marry a woman and have children. 2 men can't marry and create a child.
What I'm saying, I don't understand why it takes away rights. Dr. Owens, can I ask you, why does allowing a man to marry a man or a woman to marry a woman take away the right of a man to marry a woman?
First of all, it's not natural law, and it's immoral. It is not natural for a man to be married to a man. That is not natural. And that's what this award is about. Dr. King emphasized it must line up with natural law. And if you believe that so much that a man should marry a man, a woman should marry a woman, go try it with electricity.
I'm asking though, why does it take away the right of a man to marry a woman? You said it takes away the right.
Let's cut off right here. We're running out of time. We have a few more things on the agenda. I'm going to ask Miss Marie Hickson to come and sing the national anthem for us. Then Bishop Fred Adjutanjo will close